Okay, so this is our first session of the series about the Endgame Repertoire, which is a concept that I think I'm pioneering. Not 100%. It's not like I thought of it 100% on my own, but I'm at least the first person I think who's setting in stone the idea of an Endgame Repertoire, which is um, a, s- a model games based approach to learning how to play the end of the game. So we take games where the end game was played in a very instructive way, and rather than focusing on the opening part of the game and then like cutting off the rest, we're kind of flipping that around. We're looking at the end game and trying to commit to memory the positions that arise in that end game and the kinds of ideas and plans that we can get from it. And so I'm here with Shai, and we're gonna take a look at some games, starting with Capablanca's match with Corzo y Prinzipe, who was the Cuban champion when Capablanca was 15. Capablanca was born in 1888, so I guess that would mean just before the end of the century they were playing. And excuse me. So in this game we have a Dutch, and Shai is an E4 player by nature, so the Dutch is a little bit unfamiliar maybe. But I actually like to play D4 sometimes when I know that my opponent plays the Dutch, because usually people who play Dutch, in my experience, they don't want to really know any theory. They want to have as compact of a repertoire as possible. So they choose the Dutch because it eliminates a lot of options for white. But the downside is that it's kind of weakening the king. And so sometimes I can go for an early attack against the Dutch, and that's really pleasant. And otherwise, it has some of the downsides of there being a pawn on f5 long term, which we'll probably discuss a little bit more as we go. So I was just talking about how gambits rarely ever lead to an endgame situation, but Capablanca did actually play some gambits. So here we have e4, and this is the Staunton gambit. After fe4, I bet Shai can easily guess what the next move might be. Not what they played, but like what's a logical way to play in a gambit situation.
I mean, Queen H5 bears thinking about,
Okay.
and Knight C3.
Knight c3 is the move that makes more sense. The reason it's not Queen h5 is because they can block with g6. So this is more thematic.
Yeah, just you got to think about it.
Right. So at the time, pretty often people would just return this pawn. So Capablanca is playing a gambit more or less like with no risk, which I think is the only situation where he'd really ever play a gambit. I don't think he ever played like Evan's gambit or one where you're really giving up a lot of material. And the reason we're discussing this, even though this is an endgame repertoire video, is because it's important to be attentive to the transition from the opening to the endgame. Otherwise, if you only play wild gambits where you're always down material and your pawn structure is shattered, you're rarely going to be able to apply those endgame concepts that you learn in the more classic endgame books that focus on theoretical positions. Okay, so next is bishop g5, which is putting pressure on e4 in the center. Let me see. I have some notes here about this moment, just in case it's interesting. Um, there's another alternative here where you can play f3. Oh, hold on. Do you play d5, or did I play d5?
I didn't play D5.
Oh, okay. I must have done it by accident. My bad. Um, so after f3, they can take, and we can take back with the knight, and this is a full-on gambit line. And one way that people like to play the Dutch is with g6, but here we don't have to go for an endgame anymore because they've provided us with some extra options. So what would you play here? There's no wrong answers, but
Bishop C4.
okay, bishop c4 is interesting. What if they play d5?
I would just back it to bishop b3.
To b3? Okay. Um, I think that if you play bishop c4, d5, bishop b3, you're going to pressure d5 long term, but they can solidify it with a move like c6 or e6. And I'm not sure if you're breaking through. You might be doing perfectly fine there, but there's another option that I think gives you more long-term attacking chances. Do you want to try again? I'll play that variation out just so everybody can see as well. And something like c6, but they might not play it right away. Okay, so this is our position. One thing that I like to think about when I'm going for the attack is where is my opponent going to castle? In the Dutch, I think it's pretty clear where they're going to castle every time.
So the very aggressive thing to do would be knight e5.
Hmm.
But
But then after
I'm
d6, you
not
probably
sure
have to just go
that's
back. It might be too aggressive. Um, I think you might have been thinking of a sacrifice on g6. Is that the idea?
yeah.
So if you take on g6, like let's say we go here,
There's not enough follow up yet.
yeah, you could play this, but then they can block it with the bishop, right? So the move that I'm kind of fishing for is bishop d3. Why is it? You're not playing that move, are you?
Nope. Not me.
How is it playing a move on its own? That's so weird.
Is that not even the move you have planned?
No, I don't have any.
Because you didn't plan the d5 move either.
No, I didn't play anything, so I'm curious about why this is the case. Hmm. Visibility is invite only, so it's not like anybody else is on this study. That's super weird. It's
That'd be
like
very.
it's a ghost. Um,
I feel like I'd do that.
what?
Just wait for them to make a move and then make a wrong move right after every time.
Yeah, I feel like I must be doing it somehow. I was trying to like wheel with my cursor and see, but like that's also not doing it. So anyway, just a mystery. So here's a good plan to know. So whenever you see this pawn structure, especially because there's no f pawn, it's good to put a bishop right here and play h4. What is going on? It played knight c6 automatically. It's like a glitch or something. Is there a setting where I can turn this off?
It's just trying to instantly play what it thinks the best response is or something.
I don't know because I don't have an engine running. I almost never do this with an
Are we
engine.
following the line the game went?
No.
Okay, because we played two different lines. It did the d5 thing.
Yeah, that's very bizarre. I feel like it's a glitch.
We're playing Capablanca.
It also does it like instantly, so it's almost definitely a computer. It's not like some other interference. Okay, but my point was that after h4, we're kind of crashing through with h5. We might sack an exchange. We might play knight e5 or knight g5. There's some really good options here for the attack. So this was something I just wanted to stop and take a look at because just because we are thinking endgame repertoire doesn't mean that from the beginning of the game we always need to think about endgame. It's just we need to wait until a sufficiently good opportunity arises for the attack to go all in for the attack. And other than that, I mean, aside from that moment, it's good to just wait and see. Okay, so this is just like a little sidebar. Excuse me. And in this game, they played c6. They were avoiding the move d5, which I would consider to be something of an error. What do you think white should play here?
Feel like White's king side's got real cramps.
It is, but there's a tactical opportunity. Even when we're thinking about the end game, it's good to look for the tactics first. In fact, even more so as we get closer to the end game. Do you remember my video about the drawback principle?
It was a long time ago.
Yeah, it was kind of a while ago. So the broad stroke of that is, if someone plays a move, it's good to ask what is the downside of that move. For instance, with d5, I would say that the downside is very temporary. It's that pawn is under attack by the knight, which is not
Are we
much of a big deal
thinking the
usually.
bishop takes queen h5, take pawn line?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So
Okay. I
this is a
wasn't sure if that
refutation.
was enough for what we were going
It's
for.
a pawn, yeah. So they might take with the e pawn to get some development, but then after this check, they should probably block with the pawn. And now they have to handle the notion of a queen trade, and I don't think they have a favorable way to trade queens. If they could like play two minor piece moves within reason that are not like incredibly like exploitative, like maybe knight c6 and bishop f5, then they might be happy because when you take on d8, they can take back with a rook and pressure the weak d4 pawn. But there's so many moves away from that kind of endgame strategy in this moment that it's clearly good for white to snag the free pawn. If they were just trading pawns, I might not do this, but we're definitely getting the pawn for free. So that's pretty cool. It is a good question though, like what is enough? Like what are we considering to be a sufficient advantage to go in for the line? But maybe this also goes with the endgame way of thinking. It doesn't have to be mate. Winning a pawn is just a big step on the road to accruing more small advantages that are together sufficient to win the game. All you need is for them to make another couple of mistakes, and they almost definitely will. Every level of player does that. Okay, so they played c6, preparing d5, and here Capablanca went ahead and got his pawn back because this guy doesn't play real gambits. He's not playing f3. He just wants his stuff back. And after d5, black has played a lot of pawn moves, so they have pretty good development. But white also doesn't have trouble getting their pieces out. They played knight g3, and after queen e7, you can probably see the end game is coming. What do you think Capablanca played here to cruise for the end game?
With endgame coming, queen d2.
Yeah, queen e2. So now after queen e2, this is preventing queen to b4, which was sort of a threat, and it more or less forces black's hand. They could play some waiting moves, like they could move their bishop or their knight, but he just went ahead and traded. And part of why he went for this trade is probably because of the age-old wisdom, which is not so wise anymore, that against a young opponent, you should play for the endgame. So Capablanca was only 15 when he played this match for the Cuban Championship. And
How superior would you say white is in this position?
I would say they're not superior yet.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So, is the queen e2 like very committing to let's jump into this endgame right away and see how it goes?
It is sort of committal. That's a good point. But I think since there's so many other pieces on the board, you should be confident that you have enough resources to continue posing some problems. For instance, if I look at this from a endgame perspective, I'm not thinking about specific lines. I see this pawn on f6. It's kind of hampering that bishop on f8. It has the d6 square, but long term, if you can make it important to use the f6 square, then probably you're going to inconvenience them a lot. The pawn would rather be on f7, so that's already a small detail that I think is detrimental to black, whereas white has no problems with their pawn structure whatsoever. The main issue for white is that they don't have a bishop pair, but for black, with a pawn on c6 and d5, their light square bishop isn't that great, and it can't develop to f5 or g4 right now. So I think that it's closed enough that the bishop pair won't matter for a little while. In order for them to open the position for the bishops, they'd probably have to play c5, which weakens the d-pawn. It'll become an isolated pawn at that point. So I think these are all things that you can look at as hope for the future of your game. Even though you don't have queens anymore, you have all these little things that are maybe going to add up. And there's a lot more game to play. People make mistakes regularly, so all you have to do is wait sometimes. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So the endgame position that I want us to focus on happens a few moves later. So they played bishop d6, knight f3, because of, of course, what else, right? Castles, and also castles. Sometimes when you're going for the endgame, you don't want to castle, but the alternative, a move like king d2, you're going to get harassed by this bishop, probably. So it's kind of... It's still good to castle here, even though you are going into the endgame, where the king likes to be centralized. In my experience, if there's two bishops on the board, you don't really want to centralize your king immediately, especially if there's also rooks. Two bishops and a rook is just too much long-range stuff for your king to be sitting there on like e2 or d2. Okay, so now bishop g4, finishing development. Almost. And here Capablanca asked a tricky question. He said h3. So what are you going to do with that bishop? Put it on g4. You must want to trade it for the knight. And, of course, there's not really a reasonable response, aside from bishop takes f3. So this resolved a little bit of a problem for Capablanca. Do you remember what that problem was?
Bishop pair.
Right, so he resolved the bishop pair by targeting that bishop.
Why wasn't queen or bishop e6 a reasonable response? Just because why would he put the bishop out to g4 in the first place?
Yeah, it's a little bit like you're contradicting yourself, but it's also the case that you want to use the e file because it's the only open file. And if you put the bishop on e6, it's going to probably stall your attempt. I mean, this is definitely a valid line. Let me see if I have any notes for this position. Nope, I don't have any note for this move. I probably should have put this down at some point. Well, I think that my point still kind of stands, that they're hoping to be able to use the e-file. But also, like, it feels kind of weird to contradict yourself quickly like this. I first saw this.
At the same time, you could argue it induced a weakness, in h3.
Right. We'll see how much of a weakness that really ends up being. Which is a really important and interesting thing about this endgame, because they tried to highlight that weakness by playing bishop f3 and then bishop g3, doubling the pawns. So it's kind of like they're saying, you have a bad pawn structure. My only issue is that I have a knight against your bishop, and that's that. But it turns out that it's not so simple. That the pawn on h3, like, while it's been provoked to advance, it's not actually weak at all, and neither is the pawn on g3. So knight d7 was played, and this is our first critical position. I would consider this the beginning of our endgame repertoire. You know how with the opening, it's like we usually end it after like 13 moves or something? Well, here we're starting it on move 14. I have a funny question, maybe. So if you were walking at a chess tournament and you saw this position, what move number would you have guessed they were on without looking at the clock or the score sheet?
Over 40, with nowhere in the middle.
I would probably guess somewhere in the 30 to 50 range, right? But Capablanca just quickly took it all the way there with this early queen trade, and Corzo was cruising for the same thing. When you're playing an opponent who likes to trade pieces, it can often turn to your advantage, because with every trade that they initiate, you are going to be left with a piece on that square. So you might end up with some extra piece activity with which to launch an attack. In this case, that was definitely true. We started the endgame with them not even fully finished development, which is a very minor difference, but it gives you something to try to work with. So after knight d7, Capablanca, has neutralized the bishop pair. He has a long-range bishop against the knight. You might recall that Capablanca said that a bishop is stronger in the endgame, and I think the specific quote was something like, a bishop is more terrible in the hands of an expert player, and as one becomes more expert, their prowess with the bishop grows, something like that. It's basically saying that knights are more similar to bishops at a low level, and at a high level, the bishop is stronger than the knight. Kind of an interesting perspective. So we'll definitely see a bit of that in this game. I think that's the main theme. It's going to be the bishop against knight struggle. Okay, so one thing I like to do in positions like this is guess the move. So, what do you think? That's one thing that helps to ingrain the endgame patterns in your mind.
I feel like there's where's this knight gonna go dance that can occur if we do bishop g4, knight's gotta go to b6, and then we can play d3.
Right. I think that we should take that a little bit further. Where do you think they'll put the knight next after b3?
Um,
They only have one option,
Probably
right?
if what I would do would centralize the rook first, and then put the knight in the corner and try and get it out to c7.
How are you accomplishing that?
So, knight there, b3, then I play something like rook a to d8.
Okay. And then you're maneuvering from b6 to c7 through a8.
Yeah.
That's an interesting pattern. So when you arrive on c7, I guess you're hoping to go to b5 or something?
b5, e6.
Okay. I think e6 makes some sense because then you're going to probably put pressure on the d pawn, but then they'll play c3, and in order for you to break this pawn, you have to play c5. But again, because of the pawn structure that was established in the opening, when you play c5, the d pawn hangs. So I think this might be a little bit too long and dangerous because it's so long. What I was thinking is that after bishop g4, knight b6. Well, why did it do it? It did it again. Okay, b3. What's it gonna do now? Okay. Whoa, it actually did do something. That's so weird. Um, I don't want rook e8. What I was going to say is that you can play the move knight c8 with the idea to go to d6 and then e4. And this is probably a little bit more pragmatic if we're in the business of running knights over the earth. But like the probably computer recommended, it's a better idea to activate the rooks first because we have time to play knight c8, which is a sort of backwards maneuvering move. You might recall this guy Mark Dvoretsky, famous coach. Well,
Uh,
he had this idea that a maneuver is defined in some sense as a sequence of moves in which the piece is not good until the last move. So whenever you are maneuvering your pieces, you're at risk until that piece lands on its destination square, which is part of why I was kind of skeptical about knight a8. So you could play rook d8. I think rook e8 is probably a little bit more precise. Excuse me. And let's say that they try to force you to play knight a8, right? They're going to play a4. You go here. I think you're incurring some risk.
And you could still do knight c8 in this position too.
Right, you could. I just wanted to address your idea.
Yeah.
Um, Here, after you come back out, you're probably you might be facing already a forced exchange of rooks. You're at least like maybe losing the file. Let me see. If you go here, is this possible? I think this is what's going to happen. Yeah. So you might think that this has nothing to do with the knight maneuver. This whole thing with like bishop d7 and so on, but it really does, because this knight is badly placed for the moment, and white's pieces are coordinating better. So that's kind of the point that I was hoping to make. I think the merit of knight c8 is that it's a shorter maneuver. You get to a good square much faster, so that that moment of risk doesn't last and become a problem. Okay, so bishop g4 was a move. I think that the ultimate conclusion, though, weird how it automatically placed that, is that after rook e8, the position is it's still playable. It's not like white is crushing or anything. So there's something that's a little bit more logical, and it's rook fe1. The idea here is pretty simple. You know, going to the endgame, we want to improve all of our pieces to the maximum before we attempt to improve the pawns. There's only one open file. We're going to take it. So that's how it's going to go. They played rook a e8. Let's try to guess the move again. We can guess through the end of the game, maybe.
The obvious one is to continue with this bishop threat. Knight b6, off by p3.
Why do you want to attack the knight so much?
Do
you think it's well placed on d7? You want to chase it away from there?
I feel like it's worse placed on b6.
It's not totally worse placed. The reason being that you are forced to play b3 to prevent it from improving itself at that point. And like, I do agree to some extent that it's worse on b6, but it's not going to stay there. You know that it's going to go to c8 and then d6 and then e4, which is a square they just took over by playing rook a e8. I'd also like to mention that when you play the move b3, it weakens a3 and c3. So it gives this knight some hope for the future. It also means that you can't do a rook lift like rook e3 or rook d3 across to b3, attacking the pawns. So it's not really for nothing. I think that we don't worry so much about the pawn on h3 because it only blocks the h3 square. But if you play a pawn to b3, it blocks b3, it blocks a3 as well. And we're more likely to want to do a frontal attack on those pawns on the queen side because they're not already guarded by the king in the first place. So there's some maybe a difference between playing b3 and playing h3.
In that case, maybe king f2?
You're really close. He played king f1. I don't know why he played king f1. This also looks perfectly good. All right. So now king f1 and f5 was played. And so here's a hint for what Capablanca played here. He really did insist on the power of the bishop over the knight. He thought it was often sufficient to win the game.
Rook takes rook e1.
Yes, exactly. So he's trading all the rooks. And there's something else that he got here. He didn't just get the bishop against the knight. So what do you think is the other thing that white got out of that exchange?
Undoubling of pawns?
They didn't undouble them.
Like, if you go g4 here?
They'll probably play f4. Let you sit with those pawns.
g4, f4, g5. Yeah, I guess.
King f7.
Hard to get that king through.
Yeah, it is hard. I think that you're going to encounter some difficulties there. Let's play that line out. It looks kind of interesting. So let's say we play a nothing burger move. Well, they can already
Let's go
prevent.
for the G4 move.
They can already prevent G4 by playing knight f6. But let's say that they play knight
All right,
b6.
third turn.
Yeah. Here we were thinking about b3, but like let's say you played g4, right? F4 is played by apparently the computer. And now if you play g5, like what you said, I think king. Oh, okay, the knight's already going to the outpost square. I wish the computer would stop doing this. I'm gonna look into this after we're done. um, I don't see a setting for it anywhere. But anyway, yeah, knight c4 looks like a really good move. Thanks, computer. But I was also thinking about this move, trying to provoke you into advancing more of your pawns and get the king to f5, something like that. You know, for example, maybe they'll stop knight c4 now. We hit the pawn, go here, king f5, and now the black king is arguably pretty well placed. Excuse me, I would say so. If the bishop moves, they could slip into e4 or g4 with some attack on the weak pawns. And then anyway, f4 is not falling. That's the other important detail here. Okay, so that was all a hypothetical because it was black's turn. The reason I was asking like what else did white get is because I wanted to not gloss over the fact that they brought their king to e1 from g1, and meanwhile black's king is on g8. So he's maintained this small lead in development all the way from the opening into the endgame. The reason that the king is better on e1 maybe than on g1 is because we want to be able to go to either flank to try to attack the pawn weaknesses, but also because we want to be able to defend our own weaknesses. The king side is defending itself. There's this bishop supporting the light squares. The knight cannot reach and attack g3. Even if it does, we'll probably play g4 like what you said, which is not undoubling the pawns, but it's also not losing a pawn. And so the queenside pawns are more vulnerable to the knight's attack, and the king is heading over there where it can defend those pawns. So it's simultaneously threatening to go corral and win some pawns, and also to defend the weaknesses. Meanwhile, black has a long way to go before they can defend the queenside, which, incidentally, is entirely on light squares. The next move is probably not too hard to guess. King d2. But then how do we react to knight e4? What do you think?
You know, the instinct is really to take it to not lose our pawn on g3, but bishop's better than knight's making me think that we're not just going to take it.
There's another big reason for us to not just gonna take it. If we... Sorry, I was...
Other than the
We're not
massive
gonna
pawn
take
chain.
it. Yeah. It's not just that it's
With,
massive, but that...
no pass pawn.
Yeah, it's a protected pass pawn. It's super bad for us. We would not be able to advance our king anymore. They would be able to run their king all the way up to f5 or anywhere that they want, really, at that point. We would not even be able to undermine it with a move like c4 because that pawn chain goes all the way back to b7. So that makes it kind of an automatic decision, actually, because we know that's losing. I would rather lose the g3 pawn. But are we losing the g3 pawn?
I was thinking about that. I couldn't figure out how we could possibly stop the knight from getting back to the e4 square if we weren't willing to trade.
Well, there's a key difference here between simply taking it and playing another move and allowing them to take the pawn and go back. They lose a lot of time. Time is really important in the endgame. It can
Okay,
be
so we're
anyway.
going the queen e3, king e3, king f4 route.
Yeah, exactly. So we play king e3. They take it. Ooh, the engine wanted to play g5, but I don't know why. I don't even know where this engine is. It's very frustrating. Um, okay, so knight takes g3. Here, king f4. They go back, and now king e5.
e5.
Yes, I'm sorry, king f5, and then we're going to go king e5 after that.
Okay. I was trying to think if there was a reason we're not taking the pawn.
No, it's a free pawn. I was just distracted by the fact that the
See,
knight's
this is the
moving.
type of tactic that I always get wrong because I take the pawn.
Yeah, actually, I get those wrong constantly too. The light chess king and pawn on games can be really rough. Um, yep, but yeah, it's a free pawn. They actually can't support it as far as I can tell. I think that they would have to play g5 here, and then we are playing. Excuse me. I think we're playing g4 now. And yeah, they can play f4 with check, but then their knight is no longer stable. I think here, king d3 with the idea of bishop e4, and the knight's gonna have to run back. Something like this.
Knight checks are bad just because they give us even more tempo.
For which one? You mean here?
No, like
In the g5
if
line?
we ran our king to d3.
Here?
Yeah, we don't care about knight checks on f2
No, not at
because
all.
we're just running to the left and
Yeah, we're probably gonna run in and up over here. Like if they go back. This looks pretty reasonable. I want to play c4. Excuse me. And like take, king b5, something like this. Like I'll just push pawns to open the way. And if they move the knight, then the bishop is getting a clear view. That's just the first plan that comes to my mind. There might even be something more intelligent that I just haven't noticed yet. This is probably the part where the light chess study will make a move on its own to interject. No. It's like a Ouija board, you know? It's like I don't know when or what it's going to do. Anyway. So they played knight d6 instead. Alright, so they want to play knight c4. How should we deal with it?
b3.
If I'm asking, it probably means that there's more than one option, right? It's always good to have at least two options. Even if you have no intention of using the second option, it's just a good habit to establish. So what do you think that second option could be?
Bishop e2 with plans of taking the knight with a centralized king and a half-passed pawn.
Yeah, that's right. It is a half-passed pawn. Oh, it's Kitty.
I have been chosen.
Yes. So bishop e2 was played. The reason... Jeez, it's annoying that it keeps playing moves. Stop it. Okay, so the reason that it's not b3 is that this weakens the a3 and c3 squares unnecessarily. Another thing to consider is that, you know, the king is a strong piece, but it might actually need the b3 square at some moment. So we're also taking that square away from our pieces. If we can keep the pawns hanging back, it's more flexible. Meanwhile, you know, we've committed nothing, but they also cannot play knight c5, knight c4, because we're just going to take it. I'm trying to decide if...
Probably f4 is my instinct.
Yeah, king f4 is also my instinct. I'm wondering if there's any need to be precise, because they could throw c3, but probably not. You know, we go here, they do this. We go here.
Yeah.
And we're not even winning this c-pawn. We're going to go over here and take this b7 pawn. So they're going to run behind us, but it shouldn't really help. You know, like they go here, and that's just kind of lights out. They can protect their C pawn, but we got the A pawn, and that's enough to win the game. Okay. So, yeah, that's a good exercise in the king and pawn game. Just like, can they do it? In the tournament that I played over the weekend, my opponent had a chance to play a winning king and pawn end game, and he just, I don't know, didn't calculate it. He just didn't really want to look at it, and he ended up not being able to win the game. So it's always good to practice these so you can like quickly evaluate what is my pawn end game going to be like. So I actually do highly recommend those difficult light chess pawn end games, even though they are really difficult. It's just great for building your intuition of what the evaluation is for a pawn end game at the end of the line. Okay, so king f7, and let's guess again.
King f4 feels like what I want to play, but then he plays king. Yeah, either there or he. I didn't see a difference.
This one is a little bit more precise, probably, because it means you're going to be able to maintain the opposition if it becomes important.
Yep, good point.
We're not there yet, though, because we have all these other pieces on the board and stuff. But king f6 also has a second reason behind it. It's not just about opposition. There's a move that they would like to
play
play.
king g5 with check if we try to play g4.
Yeah, they will play g5 with check. So what should we do about that?
h4 feels cheeky.
It is cheeky. It's the right move. They played g6. I would like to point out that h6 is ineffective. What do you think the move should be?
Does h5 do it?
Yeah, h5. Because now when they play g5, we can just take en passant. And their structure is pretty bad. In fact, I think they're losing... I was about to say I think they're losing a pawn, but I think it's not the case. I think here we're going to play g4 and break through.
That's what I was saying.
All right, nice. Yeah, that's definitely better than trying to play like bishop d3. Okay, so in the game they played g6, and it seems like you already have the idea. They played g4 here as well, even though it's a slightly different structure. It kind of transposed after h6. Well, only sort of transposed. They ended up playing both of the moves, but this is a unique and distinct variation. What should white play here? I'd like to point out that pawn on f5, which is now under attack, has been there since move 1. So this means that if Capablanca was counting on playing an endgame here, he's had that piece of information in hand all along. And that might have informed some of his past decisions about what to play in this kind of position.
Which pawn are you talking about?
The f-pawn. Because they played the Dutch, the pawn's been on f5 all along. Which means it presented itself as a target for the pawn on g3 that advanced to g4. Your cat looks like a scarf of darkness.
He is.
It sounds like the title of a book, right? Scarf of Darkness.
My instinct is to play h5, but then I'm trying to think of what to do after g5 check.
That's a good question.
So, feels like I just back up my king. Then he can come forward with his other pawn.
Yeah, it's looking pretty gridlocked. Because our king is going the wrong way, and they are blocking all the trades. See, if we want this bishop to shine against the knight, we need to get some exchanges going. So I think this would be not very good. Maybe a fortress. I'm not sure though, because after bishop d3, we do get to come in through g6. It's just that they can probably like sit and do nothing. I'm not making those moves. I'm so perplexed. um,
I'm
it,
not allowed to touch the mouse right now. Pepper won't like it.
I am not touching anything when these pieces are moving. It's definitely not me. Okay, so g5 was the move. And this will probably come as no surprise when you consider what happens after their king has to step off. What should white play here?
Quick checks for any.
We're trying to improve the pawn structure so that bishop will be better than the knight, which means we need to open the position.
To g4?
Yes, g4. Now, after fg4, they actually didn't even take the pawn. He played bishop d3. The reason is that this pawn on g4 is for us, right? It's kind of it's in hand, so it's nicer to try to put pressure on g6. They played knight f5. Now king takes g4 with tempo because the knight's hanging. They play knight takes d4, but bishop takes g6. And this is a massively advantageous transformation. Now this position is winning, even though it's equal material. Because we have the combination of bishop against knight, that's one advantage. The passed pawn on g5, and our advanced king. So with these things combined, this position is probably plus minus if I check with an engine. But still, it demands some technique. So they played c5. What do you choose as your move for white? Notice how he's like not even touching the queenside pawns. He's just kind of letting them be to make it difficult for black to attack them.
Almost feels like we want to play bishop f5 at some point, because otherwise how else is the pawn going to go through? But I'm not sure how we actually get the pawn through anyways if we go that way.
Do you
So
want to
maybe
trade?
what we want to do... One more time?
Do you want to trade? Because bishop f5 allows knight takes f5.
I still imagine that's winning in this position.
I'm less sure. Because they have 4 against 3 on the queen side. So if you go to the king and pawn game, they suddenly have something to actually do.
Yeah, but his king stuck needs to take your pawn on g, so your king can go to the left.
Yeah, it could be
And
one of
then your
those.
king's in front of his.
Right. So after king takes f5, we probably need to play a move like d4.
Then just play g6.
And then c4. No, c4 is probably too rash because you have king to e4. Okay, maybe just a move like b6.
Hmm. So I have to go all the way back to the base of the pawn chain, and by that time your king can get to the front of the pawn chain.
Right, exactly. If it was 3 versus 3, though, I think you'd probably be in good shape. So it's not that simple. But there's another way to look at that problem. You can see it as, I have 3 advantages. Why am I going to give away one of my advantages? I want more for it. I want to take a pawn and then trade. So it's good to be kind of greedy for what you can get out of this small positional advantage. Or we could at least do it when our pawn is like well on its way to queening. You know, we could do it under better circumstances. You just have to try to imagine what those better circumstances are and arrange for them. Because, you know, the pace of the game here is not too fast. Black is trying to create a pass pawn, but they have to constantly deal with the problem of your own pass pawn, and they can't improve their king that much. So you do have time here to improve your pieces. In the game, they played king h5. What were you gonna guess?
Well, king h5 was my first instinct, but I felt like it got the king away from where it needs to be.
It also brings it towards the critical squares. See, the bishop can't control g7, but the king can.
It feels like an extremist that the knight can sacrifice itself on G.
But then they'll have to get rid of all 3 pawns on the queen side. And since you haven't pushed any of them, that's pretty difficult to accomplish. So let's actually look at that other line a little bit. Chop, chop. D4, G6, B6. Oh, I was right about C4? I don't know if that it playing it means that I was right, but like maybe so.
From here we talked queen e4.
Right. I think the idea is C3.
What happens if we push instead of take on C?
Oh, they'll just take
we
it.
Play B3?
Oh, if they push here?
Yeah.
Maybe this is winning also. I'm not sure. But I thought B6. I don't know what the engine is suggesting. And here we were talking about how you have to run to the base of the pawn chain. Like maybe I would go here. No, this is lost already. So no, it's not lost. This is winning.
This is winning.
Yeah, we're gonna play D3 next.
Oh.
So they actually cannot approach when we play King F8.
That's interesting. So I can't go for the base of the pawn chain.
Yeah, you actually can't do it at all. This is important detail. See, this is why we analyze these games, because then it gives us this kind of like really easy to remember pattern that we can latch onto and use in our own games. Because even if we didn't play a Dutch, even if we didn't play a knight versus bishop, this is a really useful thing to know. Okay, and this process
Does that
of just
rely
going
on
through
the
it is
fourth
cool.
pawn? What if we had 3-on-3 there?
If we had 3-on-3 there, then I think they will win. They'll run to the base of the pawn chain. But how do we create it?
Just go back to the position we had and delete the A pawn in our brain.
Oh, okay. So you don't want to actually show it on the board. Just like pretend there's no A pawn.
I mean, it would take a little bit, but we could.
I meant, yeah. We could do it. We could play 300 moves here. I was thinking 3 versus 3 isn't like dropping off the D pawn, like with no asymmetry.
Okay.
That
I think the asymmetry is what lets us push it through.
Yeah, I think if there's no A pawn, you still have it.
Even without the A pawn, we can't run for the base of the chain.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I was just visualizing a different set of pawns. Yeah, the idea to play C4 and D3 is what's restricting them.
and the fact that he can't take it on c5
At
makes
that
that an
point,
eternal threat.
they might have a different idea. Maybe they would try to break through themselves on the B file. Like they would play A3, B4, B5, and then A4, A5 with the threat of A6, and then you would have to take, and then they'd play pawn B6. So the A pawn is helpful, but it's stopping a different idea. It's stopping the idea of promoting on the queen side. Okay. Let's go ahead a bit with this. So this was a good little variation, but King H5 with the idea of going here and preparing to play pawn to G7. So Knight E6 was played. King H6 with the same idea. King F8. Let's guess the move here.
Bishop h7.
Bishop H7 looks interesting. I wonder if I put a note about this in my original notes. Let me see.
Knight move courtesy of the computer.
Oh, they played a knight move? Shoot. I feel like
It
it's going
feels
to
like that
spoil
knight move's
things.
not even good though. Like king g6 there.
Yeah, I think that this is winning. So knight g7 may be an only move, but it doesn't mean it's a good move. um, existence doesn't imply uniqueness or something. Anyway, yeah, I think bishop h7 looks pretty reasonable. It's doing a different one? That's totally unexpected.
It's all our logic. All the other one was bad.
It hurt us, right? It's like, I'll show you guys a good knight move. Knight d8. Oh my god. I think they're trying to provoke us to play g6 at a bad time. I think this is the downside of h7.
How is this a bad time? Because the knight can go back to e. Yeah.
And now we don't really have a move.
Yeah.
There's an additional thing. So they could also put the knight on g7 and just keep it there. So what we need is the ability to chase that knight away. And for that reason, we're playing bishop f5. So,
Well, if it's being placed on g7 and just leaving it there, we discussed that the king g6 shuts it down pretty well.
well, in this case, because the bishop's hanging, it
Yeah.
doesn't. Because then we get that same pawn endgame, right? Like, stop it.
So even the right knight move there.
Yeah. Rude. Okay, I think this. This is just like what we were discussing earlier, where we put the pawns like that. So there's our pattern recognition again. But it's way more effective to just dominate the knight. This is kind of like something that you start to see once you know that it's a thing. That we put the bishop on either c8 or g4, and we are shutting down this knight forever. Stop it. Shut down. Like they can go to e8, but we're gonna eventually catch up to them. So I'm getting frustrated with this computer playing moves. But bishop c8 comes with tempo, right? They have to play b6, g6, d4. Now we have the same structure that we were talking
Now
about,
we
but
can destroy all the pawns with the bishop.
well, they're all in dark, so we're not going to be able to.
Well, like if the bishop ever gets to a6, those pawns can never move.
Right. But we should probably not do it right away because we still need to dominate this knight.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think we should play right now? Black is not without ideas, so be careful.
we care about this C4 D3 idea.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
maybe we should play B3 first,
Yes, very good.
but then he plays B5, try to reinvent his idea. So we play.
This is critical, so I just want to let you think it over. Would you let the knight out if you want a pawn? Like if that was the trade?
I was thinking about that because we can play the bishop A6 right now.
Yeah, that's the idea.
The question is, this knight coming out with check make a difference?
Well, I think not, because we're gonna hit this knight and then take the pawn on
Because the knight
b5.
can defend it, for example.
Right. But then we get this.
And then our pawn's just gonna. Yep, that makes sense.
I think here they might try this. There could be an exotic variation here where we sack a bishop. But I think it's not working. Actually no, it's running.
No stuff.
Double attack. Very important detail. So maybe
That would definitely get filed under a double attack and like the tactics on the chest.
yeah, exactly. So I think c4 is not working here because of this bishop b5. Um,
Is there any other white moves?
that's a good question. Let me ask the computer just for the sake of time. It says only bishop b5, I think. Hold on. How do you make it show more lines? Do you know?
In the menu, it says multiple lines.
Oh, this is where the computer stuff is coming from. Um, best move arrow. Turn that off. Yes. Evaluation gauge off. Okay. Hopefully that'll fix that problem. Multiple lines. Okay. I'll ramp up the CPUs as well. It's saying we can play G7 check, obviously. It's saying we can play BC4 first. But every line they're sacking a bishop.
Okay.
But it says equal as well. It says here knight b5, bc4, knight a3, but knight c2, and then knight b4. This is a nice tactic.
Oh, fork. Nice.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't mean to
So
open that.
check.
Oof. And draw.
And checks on G7. Don't change anything.
No, nothing at all. Because they'll just play king g8. Okay, that was an interesting variation. So, how do we win after b5 is now our question, right? Because if... Oh, yeah, we go here. Because this prevents knight f5, so then we take this. Oh, wait, are we losing? Hold on. Takes c3. Yeah, we lose. I think I messed up. But I also thought I turned that off. How do I... I am so confused. Yeah, I chose bishop a6, partly because you said it, but partly also because I don't want to see c4 and d3. So I'm not surprised that there's a breakthrough. Um, all right, let's say bishop a6 still. I'm frustrated. um, we thought this was the critical line. Oh, I missed a very important detail. Do you want to try to figure out what we should play here? I think this is so simple and we missed it. Probably just because we've been doing this for over an hour. Why did we put the king on h6?
Were you saying just put king h7, cement the knight there eternally?
Yes, exactly. And they're going to lose the b pawn as a result. Or they're going to lose the game. Anyway, this is a lot like what happened in the real game. So let's go back to that. So b3, king g8, a4, king f8, just waiting stuff. But then knight's forced to e8, and the king gets to h7. The knight goes back to g7. And here, for some reason, he repeated and brought the bishop back. I don't know why he went forward and then brought it back, but I can't ask him, so we'll just skip over that. Okay.
Well, that's nicely, the bishop itself stops all pawn advancement.
Right. And from the outpost square on c4, it also prevents king g8 forever. So now we have a situation where the weak pawn on a7 is important. So knight e8. I'm just going a little bit fast here. King g5. This gives them the opportunity to put a piece on g7, but it's really not going to help them because the problem now is the queen side. And this part, I'm just going a little bit fast because this is like the conversion step where we already kind of get all the important details. But this is definitely something I would recommend for you to go slowly over on your own after this. The part where the king comes over and we use Zugzwang over and over again in some situations. For instance, here our king is kind of trapped. So how are we getting out of here? This is a simple problem, but I just think it's good to observe it.
I mean, bishop back to c4 should work, right?
Probably any move will work. I was thinking of the direct approach, king a6. And why is king c6 not trapping the king? It's an easy answer though.
Pawn can go forward.
No, I wouldn't do that one because we want to keep that pawn to win the game. I'd rather win the b6 pawn somehow.
Just the bishop can check.
Yeah, exactly. We can check them away and play king b5. So, stop it. That was the idea. Okay. So there's that, but then the game ended very rapidly. Knight e8 because they're stuck defending the b6 pawn with the king, and they can't go away from the g pawn. So next bishop f3 and bishop d5. Bishop f7. Now they can't do that repetition anymore. What do you think the next step is here?
King a7.
King a7. Okay. I think I would play knight f5. See, it did it for me, right? I agree. I agree. Knight f5. It's not quite working out. There's another way that you can break through and win.
A5 looks like it works.
Okay, B takes A5.
King takes.
And then king to D6. I think that's a draw. Remember, try to be kind of greedy. Like, we have this A5 break, but I want to get the most for it, right? What's a way that you could use the A5 break to win more material?
And if our queen's already on B5, then we can win the C5 pawn.
Precisely. So he played king B5, knight F5, and A5. They played just a couple more moves. Knight D6, king A6, B takes A5, and G7. Because he was going to lose the whole queen side, so he had to try something like this, but it was no use. So this was a really great game. I had another Capablanca game prepared, but that would probably be a game for another session. That game is also from this match where he became the Cuban champion. He didn't become the champion like in this game, but it was part of the set. And yeah, I highly recommend that you go over this game, try to understand all of its details, and maybe even catalog for yourself in this study or in a separate study some key positions that you thought were really instructive, like maybe where all the pawns are aligned and we can't bring the king back to attack the base of the chain because of the c4 and d3 idea, or maybe the part where we're playing king h5 and king h6, or there's a lot of key moments here, or you could even just comment them in this study. So these are all good ways to try to cement the memory of this game and make it accessible for you as part of your endgame repertoire in your future games.
And not the fact that I would have lost this game with both colors at every time in this game.
Yeah, but after you've seen a bunch of these, and I have a lot of material prepared, I think you'll feel differently about these games. You'll be like, oh, well, I can play like Capablanca here.
All right.
Alrighty, I think we can wrap up here.
Sounds good.
All right.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.